what if the very tools we embrace for progress, the things we think are helping us?
What if they're subtly reshaping us? Our souls, maybe. Our whole world.
Yeah, exactly. In ways we don't even perceive. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a really powerful conversation. It's from the book Islam, Science, Muslims, and Technology by Seyyed Hossein Nasr and Muzaffar Iqbal.
A fascinating read.
It really is. And this isn't just, an academic chat. It tackles a critical dilemma, one facing the Muslim world, sure, but honestly, all of us in this modern age.
Which is?
Well, how do you navigate this relentless tide of modern science and technology?
Without losing yourself, your spiritual core, your cultural essence.
Exactly. What makes a civilization? Well, that civilization.
Right.
So our mission here is to unpack the core arguments from this source. We'll explore these different visions for the future of Islamic thought, Islamic civilization.
And uncover some maybe surprising insights into how our relationship with tech impacts, well, everything. Our lives, the environment.
Even our understanding of reality itself, where we came from.
Big questions.
Huge. And we'll start by going back to a specific moment, a pivotal one, really. This 1995 International Conference on Science in Islamic Polity in Islamabad, Pakistan.
Ah, yes, that conference. That was quite something.
It sounds like it. Not just academics talking amongst themselves.
No, far from it. It was a real clash of philosophies, with massive real-world implications.
It even stirred up controversy. I read something about the local papers.
Oh, yeah. There was this one quite scathing article, famously titled, "The Circus Comes to Town Again."
Wow. Okay, so let's unpack that. At the heart of that conference, and this book, really, are these three very different perspectives on how the Muslim world should engage with modern science and tech.
It's a fascinating snapshot, isn't it? Such conflicting ideas all present in one place.
Totally.
And what's so compelling is how these views, articulated by Seyyed Hossein Nasr, the president of Pakistan at the time, and Ziad and Sardar, they reveal fundamentally different ways of understanding science.
And progress, what that even means.
Exactly. Progress, the future path for Islamic civilization. I mean, they couldn't be more distinct, these views.
So let's start with Nasr. Seyyed Hossein Nasr, what's his take?
Okay, so Nasr. He champions a deeply religious view of the cosmos. For him, science in traditional Islamic civilization wasn't separate from faith. It was rooted profoundly in Tawhid.
The principle of divine unity.
Precisely. It's not just a theological idea. It means everything in creation is interconnected. It all points back to the one God.
Right.
So from that standpoint, Nasr looks at modern science and sees it as Faustian.
Faustian, like a deal with the devil?
Kind of, yeah. A bargain for immense knowledge and incredible power, but at the potential cost of the human soul, our spiritual connection.
What specifically does he critique about it?
He points to 5 main traits. First, its secular view of the universe, so sort of pushing God out. Second, its mechanization of the world, seeing it like a machine. Third, its reliance only on rationalism and empiricism, what you can measure and reason about as the only ways to know things. Fourth, Cartesian dualism.
That's the separation of mind and body, or the observer and the observed.
Yeah, that split between the knowing subject and the object being known, as if they're totally separate. And finally, its drive to exploit nature purely for power.
So he sees this whole approach as cutting God out of the picture.
That's exactly his phrase. He says it's like cutting off the hands of God from his creation. So for Nasr, Islamic civilization can't just copy Western science and tech.
Why not?
Because its philosophical foundations, its whole worldview, would basically destroy the spiritual core of Islamic civilization itself.
Wow, so it's not just about flawed methods, it's the roots of modern science that are the issue for him, the way it makes us see the world.
Exactly. It's a deep warning. The tools we use can change how we understand reality.
Okay, but then you had a completely different perspective at that same conference from the president of Pakistan.
Completely different. His view, and it actually echoes some earlier Muslim reformers from the 19th century.
Right.
Sees modern science and technology almost as a magical segue to power and empowerment.
Magical. So like a shortcut.
Pretty much. The thinking was straightforward. Look at the huge gap, economic, political, military, between the Muslim world and the West.
And they saw science as the reason for that gap.
Directly. They attributed it to Western scientific achievements. The president actually lamented how low the Muslim world's scientific output was. Said it was less than a single Western country.
Ouch.
Yeah. So he called for unrestrained acquisition of modern science and technology, said it was absolutely necessary for the survival of Muslim Ummah, the whole global Muslim community.
So just grab the tech, basically.
Basically. And the underlying assumption there is crucial.
Which is?
That science and technology are value-free, that you can just import them, use them, without bringing along the whole Western worldview they came from.
Which Nasr would completely disagree with.
Fundamental.
Yeah. Okay, so you have Nasr's deep spiritual warning on one side, and this urgent call for uncritical adoption for survival on the other. Where does the third figure, Ziauddin Sardar, fit in? His view sounds different again.
It is. Sardar takes what he calls an ijmali position. He doesn't see modern science as this grand quest for objective truth.
No. Then what?
He sees it more as a socially constructed thing, an instrumental problem-solving tool.
A tool. Okay.
And this is key, he forcefully argues science is never value-free, never neutral.
So he agrees with Nasr on that point.
On the non-neutrality, yes, but maybe for different reasons. Sardar says if you believe science is neutral, you're basically being a dupe and victim of Western domination and control. Strong words.
Yeah. So what's his vision, then, if science isn't universal truth?
His vision is pretty radical. He thinks each civilization should produce its own specific kind of science, one that deals with its own unique problems, rooted in its own worldview.
Wow. Okay.
And he's quite critical of trying to, discover modern science in the Quran after the fact. He dismisses that as Bukhailism.
What's Bukhailism?
It refers to Maurice Bucaille, who famously tried to show the Quran anticipated modern science. Sardar sees that as forced interpretation. He's also critical of the conventional approach of organizations like Comstech, the OAC's science body.
Okay, so summarizing these three, it's like you have Nasr saying, be careful, the soul is at stake. The president saying, we need this tech to survive now. And Sardar saying, hold on, science isn't universal truth. Let's build our own relevant science.
That's a great way to put it. Three incredibly distinct paths emerging from that moment. A real crossroads for Islamic thought.
It really shifts our perspective. And one area where these worldviews just fundamentally collide is, well, the very beginning of everything. Cosmogenesis, how things came to be.
Absolutely.
How does the Islamic understanding of the cosmos's origin stack up against or differ from modern science?
That's a crucial area. Because the Islamic view, when you really delve into it, challenges modern scientific cosmology.
Yeah.
It asserts a completely different relationship between God, the cosmos, and us, humanity.
How so? Is it just about how things were made?
Not just how, but why they continue to exist. Why they endure. The Islamic cosmological doctrine starts with the basics. The cosmos has a beginning, it has an end, and it's created by God.
Al-Khaliq, Al-Bari, Al-Mu'awwir, the creator, the maker, the fashioner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's a critical point.
Yeah.
The cosmos isn't just set in motion and left alone. It's ontologically dependent on God at every single moment.
Dependent, meaning?
Meaning it needs God's sustaining power to simply be. The Quranic phrase, kun fayakun, be, and it is, isn't just about the initial creation. It implies a continuous recreation, a constant divine act keeping everything in existence.
That's a very different picture from just, say, the Big Bang happening and then physical laws taking over.
Completely different. And the doctrine also talks about the kalima, the word.
The word?
Yes, the first being created by God, the medium through which everything else was then made. It's profoundly significant, symbolically linked to things like the pen, the primordial light, the universal intellect, the spirit.
Wow. So the very first emanation from God.
Right, through which creation unfolds. And another key difference is time.
Time.
Islamic thought often uses a qualitative conception of time. Very different from our modern linear quantitative clock time. Think about phrases in the Quran like the night of power is better than 1,000 months.
Or a day with the Lord is 1,000 years.
Exactly. That quality, that depth, isn't captured by just counting seconds or years. And this makes the Islamic perspective inherently skeptical of modern scientific hypotheses that take limited observations and just extrapolate them linearly across vast, vast stretches of time.
Interesting. And how does it view the study of nature itself?
The Quran encourages studying nature, definitely, but not just to collect facts. Nature is seen as full of ayat signs.
Signs of God.
Signs pointing to his omniscience, his omnipotence. And crucially, in this view, our intellect, the human mind, is capable of knowing the essential reality of things, not just surfaces, but essences. From, as Nasr puts it, a lowly sand pebble to the one, the absolute.
So a much richer, layered, more interconnected view of creation. How does that contrast specifically with modern cosmology, like the Big Bang Theory?
Well, modern cosmologies, despite all their sophistication, they remain inherently uncertain about the absolute origin and the ultimate end of the cosmos. They tend to reduce that relationship between God and the world to a purely material level.
Cutting off the hands of God, as Nasr said earlier.
Precisely. Now, some theologians do try to find parallels between Islamic ideas and, say, the Big Bang. But Nasr himself views the Big Bang Theory as highly conjectural, always changing.
He doesn't buy it as the final answer.
No. He notes quite pointedly that a generation from now, some other interpretation may be placed upon this most conjectural type of so-called scientific activity. His core argument is that a purely physical cosmology, one that only deals with matter and energy,
can't possibly be a complete cosmology.
Exactly. It leaves out the qualitative dimensions, the spiritual reality, the why behind it all.
So the takeaway for you listening is really profound. It pushes us to question, what even is science? What is cosmology? Is it just about what we can measure? Or is there a deeper reality, maybe a spiritual one, that needs to be part of the conversation?
A fundamental question.
And this ties directly into technology, because the deep dive reveals that modern tech isn't just neutral tools, cool gadgets, efficient systems. It has these profound, often hidden effects on our inner lives, on our societies.
Absolutely. And what's really fascinating is the qualitative shift that happened with the Industrial Revolution. Before that, historically, technology, think techne in Greek, ours is in Latin, wasn't really separate from art.
Like craftsmanship, or aina in Arabic.
Exactly. Objects were crafted by hand. They were imbued with a kind of spiritual significance, a sense of care, love, devotion from the maker. Even ancient machines, think Archimedes or Hero of Alexandria, were often designed for play and amusement, not relentless mass production.
So the Industrial Revolution changed that relationship.
Completely.
Yeah.
With modern technology, there's this fundamental transfer of know-how, of skill, from the human to the machine.
How do you mean?
Well, think about it. A traditional craftsman holds the knowledge, the art, the skill in their hands, their mind, their whole being. A factory worker operating a modern machine?
Yeah.
Often they just press buttons.
Right. The intelligence is in the machine.
The know-how becomes embedded in the machine. And Nasr argues this process actually empties the human element, the creativity, the love, the devotion from the work itself. It makes work boring and tedious.
And that's why we need long vacations.
That's his point. Traditional societies where work was integrated with life and meaning didn't have that same concept or need. And it's crucial, he insists, to understand that technology is not neutral. It's never just a tool.
It carries a worldview with it.
Yes, it brings a whole technological culture, a worldview that he argues is fundamentally against the soul of the human being as an immortal being. It subtly, profoundly changes us into machines in many ways.
That's a really strong claim. Changing us into machines. Can you give some concrete examples of how this hidden impact plays out? Things we experience every day?
Sure. Take cell phones.
Yeah.
Obviously convenient, right? We all use them.
Couldn't live without them, some might say.
Right. But Nasr argues they destroy that inner quiet space where we are alone with God. They make us nearly always be connected to the turmoil of the external world. That constant input, that lack of silence.
Okay. What else?
Or think about so-called time-saving devices. It's a paradox, isn't it?
No, so?
They're meant to save time, but Nasr says they actually destroy time. They create this constant pressure for immediate responses, immediate gratification. They break the natural rhythm of waiting, of patience, of deeper engagement.
I can see that. The constant notification.
Exactly. Even something seemingly peaceful, like the automobile, we all rely on it. But Nasr points out even its peaceful use is a major source of aggression against nature. Think pollution, resource depletion, climate change, or modern agriculture. Mechanized agribusiness. It completely eradicates the spiritual dimension that traditional farming often had, that connection to the land, the seasons, the sacredness of food. It's replaced by genetically modified crops, driven solely by the logic of higher yields and profit.
So the common thread is a kind of severing, a disconnection.
Precisely. Modern technology, in its essence, severs that continuous spectrum of creation from God. In traditional Islamic culture, everything from making a simple comb to composing intricate Sufi poetry was seen as related somehow to divine creativity. Modern tech breaks that link.
He even talks about it destroying Islamic space.
Yes, physically and spiritually. He gives the stark example of pilgrims using cell phones during the tawaf, the circumambulation of the Kaaba in Mecca. He considers that a profound violation, a blasphemy of the worst kind, because it injects the profane, the mundane, the technological distraction into the most sacred space and time.
Wow. So the implication for you listening is really clear. Every tech choice we make, the phone in our pocket, the car we drive, the food system we participate in, carries this hidden worldview. It shapes us, often without us even realizing it. It demands a deeper look, doesn't it?
It really does. A more discerning eye.
And if technology shapes our inner lives, our souls, then it's maybe not surprising that this critique extends outward to our impact on the environment. Nasr sees the environmental crisis not just as, pollution out there.
No, he sees it as deeply connected to our inner spiritual state.
Yeah.
A symptom of a deeper malaise.
Right. So when we talk about environmental crisis, what does that encompass for him?
It's crucial to get this. We're not just talking about smog or plastic in the ocean.
Yeah.
Those are obviously critical issues. We're also talking about the inner natural environment within us.
Meaning?
Our own bodies, our health, even the quality and spiritual resonance of the food we eat. The word crisis itself implies a dangerous imbalance, right? A departure from a previous state of harmony, of ecological equilibrium.
And where does he trace the roots of this crisis back to?
Fundamentally, he argues, it began when our concept of nature changed, when nature stopped being seen as sacred, as imbued with divine presence, and became just stuff, a secularized mass, and it.
The hands of God were cut off from nature.
Conceptually, yes, that sacred link was severed. And this shift, he connects it to the rise of anthropocentric humanism during the Renaissance, this idea of Promethean man.
Man is the measure of all things.
Exactly. Prioritizing human wants and welfare above everything else, which led inevitably to disregarding nature's inherent rights, seeing it only as a resource to be exploited. This kind of collective selfishness, Nasr argues, is actually a modern phenomenon on this scale.
And then technology amplifies this.
Massively. Modern technology, combined with human greed and the constant creation of false needs through advertising and consumer culture, it drives this endless cycle of consumption, pushing the planet towards, in his words, annihilation.
That's a really stark picture. But here's the paradox you mentioned earlier. When it comes to the Muslim world specifically, what's the situation? Given that Islam traditionally does emphasize nature as signs of God.
It is a huge paradox, and a painful one for Nasr, I think. While the crisis largely originated in the modern West, the awareness of it, the activism around it, it's often stronger in the West now than in many parts of the Muslim world.
Why is that?
He observes that despite their faith's teachings, many Muslim leaders, and indeed the general population, are often blindly copying Western technological paths, including the environmentally destructive ones.
Driven by what?
Often by a kind of deep trust in Western technology, maybe linked to that earlier desire for power and development we discussed. Sometimes it's even rationalized with this sentiment of, well, it's our turn now to industrialize, to consume, just like the West did.
Ignoring the consequences the West is now grappling with.
Exactly.
So if just cleaning up emissions or recycling more, the cosmetic changes aren't enough, what deeper solutions does Nasr propose? What's the path forward from an Islamic perspective?
He's very clear that superficial fixes, cleaner fuels, better filters, while maybe necessary, are only temporary bandages. They don't address the root cause, which requires a deep transformation of our understanding of nature and of the human state, a truly radical change in the worldview that dominates our modern society.
And for Muslims specifically?
He emphasizes their unique responsibility as Khalifatu Allah fil ard, God's stewards or vicegerents on earth. This isn't optional. It's a core duty found in the Quran and the Prophet's teachings, hadith, to protect God's creation, even if it feels like the 11th hour before the Day of Judgment.
Okay, so what practical steps does he suggest?
He outlines several. First, a massive effort to increase awareness, especially among opinion makers, the learned scholars, the ulama, but also the general public, critically linking the environmental crisis directly to Islamic principles and practices.
Make it a religious issue, not just a secular one.
Precisely. Second, encouraging local action. Small community groups, promoting organic farming, planting trees, maybe even establishing eco-villages communities, trying to live more sustainably, even if initially they cater to tourists.
Grassroots efforts.
Yes. Third, actively preserving traditional Islamic technologies, especially in agriculture, avoiding GMOs, supporting small farms, and also in urban design and architecture, protecting beautiful, sustainable traditional city quarters like those in Fez, Yazd, Aleppo, and using their principles to inspire new, more humane and ecological designs.
Learning from the past.
Absolutely. And finally, perhaps most profoundly, a fundamental rethinking of happiness, moving away from the idea that happiness comes from endless material accumulation.
That's what?
Towards valuing simpler things, fostering a qualitative relationship with production and consumption, not just quantitative, appreciating craftsmanship, durability, meaning, rather than just more stuff.
It's a powerful call to action, a reminder that our lifestyle choices, what we buy, how we live, they have these huge spiritual and ecological consequences. It's demanding a fundamental shift in how we relate to the world around us.
Rooted firmly in spiritual understanding.
Which brings us to another huge and maybe even more controversial area, the origin of life itself. This conversation takes a remarkably bold stance, doesn't it? Challenging the dominant scientific theories of evolution.
It really does. And what's intriguing right off the bat is that Nasr argues Darwinian and neo-Darwinian evolution isn't just a scientific theory. He calls it an ideology.
An ideology, meaning it's more than just explaining facts.
Meaning it carries philosophical baggage, assumptions, and even social implications that go beyond pure science. He points out, quite frankly, that challenging it, especially if you're a biologist in, say, an Anglo-Saxon university department, can lead to professional ostracism. It's often treated as dogma, not just theory.
Okay, so what's his critique? He breaks it down.
Yes, he offers a fourfold critique. First, he raises the question of form, the Greek morphos. Traditional thought, he says, understands forms as fixed archetypes.
Like Platonic forms.
In a sense. He uses the example. A triangle is a triangle from the moment it exists. Its essence doesn't evolve. Similarly, he argues, life forms have a finality of their own, an inherent nature. Modern science, obsessed with quantifying everything, kind of loses the ability to study these concrete, qualitative forms.
Okay, that's the first point. What's second?
Second concerns creativity and divine causality. God, in Islam, is Allah, living, and Al-Muhyi, the giver of life. God is the ultimate source of all existence, and especially of life itself.
So life can't just emerge from non-life randomly?
For Nasr, no. Life is not reducible to non-life. There's a fundamental gap, a quantum jump, he calls it, between complex chemistry and the simplest biological life. He believes modern evolutionary views effectively take the power of creativity from God and give it to nature itself.
Okay, so form, then divine creativity. What's third?
Third is a logical criticism. He asks, basically, how can something greater emerge from something lesser? Through purely random, undirected processes.
Can you give an example?
He uses a striking one. How do you get the greatest works of human genius, like Dante's Divine Comedy, emerging from a bowl of soup of molecules? He also points out that logic itself, the very tool we use to reason, seems constant. It doesn't appear to have evolved.
Right. The rules of logic seem stable.
Exactly. And his fourth critique is mathematical, drawing on information theory.
Information theory, how does that apply?
It's related to arguments from intelligent design. The basic principle is you can never get out of box A more information than you put into it.
Okay.
He views a biological cell as like a little box packed with incredibly complex, specified information, the DNA code, the cellular machinery. For that level of complex information to arise spontaneously, purely by chance, he argues, is statistically absurd.
So, based on these critiques, is he rejecting all forms of biological change over time?
No, and this is a crucial distinction he makes. He accepts what's generally called microevolution.
Meaning?
Adaptation within a species. Changes within the existing archetypal possibilities of that species, like, variations in beak shape in finches or changes in human skin color adapting to climate. That's fine.
But he rejects macroevolution.
Yes, the idea that one fundamental kind of creature transforms into a completely different kind. Fish to amphibian, reptile to bird, ape to human. That transformation across species boundaries, he rejects.
What about the fossil record? Isn't that supposed to show these transitions?
He argues it doesn't. He asserts the fossil record actually shows the sudden appearance of new species, fully formed. What some paleontologists have called punctuated equilibrium, though he might frame it as an organicistic revolution, he's quite dismissive of those typical illustrations showing gradual human evolution from ape-like skulls.
Ones you see in museums.
Yeah. He calls them a hoax, arguing that similar variations in skull shape exist within the human population today. His core belief is that human beings have always been human, right from their first appearance.
Not evolved from other beings.
Correct. He points to evidence like very early ritual burials as suggesting an inherent human belief in immortality, a connection to a higher reality right from the start. This indicates a fundamental discontinuity with purely animal life.
And he links the ideology of evolution to other modern ideas.
Yes, he argues that Darwinian theory provided a seemingly scientific justification for the 19th century belief in infinite progress, which was often tied to industrial growth and unfortunately sometimes used to support ideas of Western cultural or even racial supremacy. This ideology, which ultimately reduces humans to complex molecular structures, he sees as a profound error, even a great sin.
So what's the key Islamic concept that offers an alternative view for him?
It comes back to that idea of continuous creation we discussed earlier. The Islamic metaphysical concept that God actively recreates the world and all the forms within it at every single instant. This is the existentiating vertical cause.
God's constant active involvement.
Right. If you grasp that, Nasr argues, then relying only on horizontal temporal causes like random mutation and selection, while completely ignoring that vertical ongoing divine action. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of reality. This perspective, he believes, actually dissolves the false choice usually presented between evolution and creationism.
It's a radically different framework. So you're left really pondering, is our standard scientific story about origins truly sufficient? Does it explain the sheer wonder and mystery of life? Or does it perhaps leave us searching for something more, something beyond the purely material?
A deep question to sit with.
Definitely. So, given all these profound critiques of modern science's philosophy, its impact via technology, its account of origins, what path forward does Nasr actually suggest? Particularly for the Muslim world, how can they foster a science that's both authentically Islamic and capable of tackling today's challenges?
That really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And his answer isn't about just throwing modern science out entirely. That's not the goal.
No blind rejection.
No. The goal is to critically engage with it, but from an independent, grounded Islamic worldview. And a core part of this is reuniting science and ethics, which he feels have been disastrously divorced in the modern paradigm.
Okay, so how does he propose doing that? He lays out some steps, doesn't he?
Yes, he suggests a kind of multi-pronged, judicious approach. First, he says Muslims absolutely must master modern science in the best manner.
Master it, including the difficult stuff.
Absolutely. Not just the applied fields like engineering, which might seem more immediately useful, but the pure and theoretical sciences too. Physics, chemistry, biology, right at their frontiers. You have to understand it deeply to critique it properly.
Okay, so master it first. Then what?
Then, simultaneously, you have to profoundly criticize its theoretical and philosophical basis. Really understand that Western science isn't neutral. It carries that ideological baggage we talked about, which often leads to scientism.
Scientism, the belief that science is the only way to truth.
Exactly. The belief that anything outside of scientific measurement isn't real or important. So master it, critique its foundations.
And then?
Then, the aim is to integrate, or maybe assimilate, the valid findings of science into the broader Islamic worldview. He sometimes uses the term Islamized science, which means carefully distinguishing the genuine scientific facts, like, say, the geological layers of the Himalayas,
from the philosophical interpretations that often get presented as facts.
Precisely. Like Darwinian evolution being presented as undisputed fact rather than a theory with philosophical underpinnings.
Okay, so master, critique, integrate. What else?
A really crucial parallel step is to actively revive the traditional Islamic sciences.
Like traditional medicine, agriculture, architecture.
Exactly. Medicine, pharmacology, agriculture, architecture, cosmology, alchemy understood spiritually. Reviving these isn't just nostalgia. It builds confidence in the enduring value of Islamic culture. It can have real economic and social benefits today, and it challenges the monopolistic claims of modern science, showing there are other valid ways of knowing and doing.
Makes sense. What about ethics?
That's central. He stresses the urgent need to rewed science and ethics, but not just by hoping individual scientists will be pious people. It has to happen at the level of the very theoretical structures and philosophical foundations of science itself. The worldview underpinning the science needs to incorporate ethical and spiritual principles. He argues that modern science, precisely because it is divorced from ethics, ends up facilitating what he calls a culture of death, citing examples like weapons of mass destruction or the abortion issue.
Wow. Heavy stuff.
It is. And to make all this possible, he says there needs to be a deep engagement with and reformulation of the authentic Islamic worldview. drawing from all its sources, the Quran, the Hadith, metaphysics, cosmology, Sufism. This rich, integrated worldview becomes the intellectual framework, the matrix, for digesting foreign knowledge and critiquing it constructively.
And one last piece, something about history.
Yes, he calls for developing an Islamic history of science written from an Islamic perspective, one that appreciates the achievements of scientists in Islamic civilization on their own terms, for their intrinsic value and their place within that worldview.
Not just seeing them as stepping stones on the way to modern Western science.
Exactly. Avoiding that Whiggish view of history.
So when you pull it all together, what's the big takeaway for you, the listener? It sounds like a call for a really profound, maybe even difficult intellectual and spiritual effort.
It absolutely is. It's moving beyond either just blindly copying the West or completely rejecting modernity. It's about forging a different path.
Towards a future where knowledge, ethics, and maybe the sacred are woven back together, where science serves humanity and creation rather than potentially undermining them.
That seems to be the ultimate goal. And it leaves us with a really potent final question, doesn't it?
Which is?
Can humanity, standing now before what Nasr calls the abyss of annihilation, an abyss largely created by science divorced from ethics, by our forgetfulness of God, can we actually change course? Can we find our way back without rediscovering and re-honoring the sacred in creation, in ourselves, in our search for knowledge?
A crucial question indeed. We've explored today how really digging into the philosophical roots of science and technology can reveal their hidden impacts on our environment, yes, but also on our values, our inner lives, even how we understand life's origins. And the dilemmas faced by the Muslim world in navigating this, in so many ways, they're universal dilemmas now, aren't they?
They really are. We're all in this technological wave together.
So here's something to consider as you go about your day. If Nasr is right, if the widespread adoption of modern technology signals a deep, often unconscious inner transformation of our societies, what might that imply about the specific technologies you choose, the ones you bring into your life, your home, your community? Yeah. How can we all cultivate a more discerning eye, not just looking at what a technology does for us, its function, but asking, what is this thing, really? What worldview does it carry? And what does it implicitly ask of us in return for its conveniences?
A lot to think about there.